When we watch horror movies, typically the worst thing that happens to a person is they're killed, and usually in quick fashion by the antagonist. Now, I'm not saying that this is a glorified way to go or that it's ideal in any way, but are there movie fates worse than death like this? Of course there are. There are dozens of examples, but I've chosen 10 or so of my personal favorites, and I've ranked them in order to piss people off. But before we jump in, I'd like to clarify two things. One, obviously there's a spoiler alert for these movies that I'm displaying right now. We're going to be going into some deep movie details, so spoiler alert there. And second, yes, I am aware that, there are several people on this list to come that do die or likely would die eventually, but we're speaking of the things that they went through prior to their death that probably made that moment feel like mercy. So here are 10 movie fates worse than death. Number 10 is Detective Mills in the movie Seven. Now, poor Detective Mills spends the entirety of the movie Seven steps behind John Doe, or so he thinks. The audience, as well as the detectives, both believe that they are much closer than they really are to catching this deranged killer. But the full plan doesn't completely reveal itself until the final iconic scene. And if finding his wife's severed head in a box wasn't enough to make Detective Mills snap and become wrath, the reveal that she begged for her life and the life of their unborn child, Mills, he didn't know about it, and that certainly was enough. So despite Somerset warning him that this is exactly what Doe wanted to finish his plan, the completely wrecked man fails to control his anguish and unloads into the killer as John Doe closes his eyes and gladly accepts the dub. In just 1 minute, Mills lost his wife, his baby, his career, and the battle with Doe, and his life was over, and he'll likely spend a very, very long time in prison having to think about everything that he gave away for that small satisfaction of putting Doe down. I'm not saying I would have done anything different in that moment, but unfortunately Detective Mills would probably long for death at this point. At number 9, I'm not going to single out one girl in particular, just all of the girls in Wolf Creek, the movies and the show, who are quote unquote lucky enough to survive, because Mick Taylor is one sadistic son of a bitch, and he seems to pride himself in his quest to rid Australia of the invading vermin that are tourists. And once he's set his sight on you, you're either A, dead as fuck, or B, if you happen to be an attractive female, might find yourself the victim of an even more heinous end. And that's not to say that you won't die eventually. It's just that it won't be weeks and months later when Mick has had his fun and figures it's time for a new fling. So his constant need to replace his victims means that he'll never stop. But I suppose at least the suffering will eventually for these girls. So they got that going for them. But yeah, this is number 9 for sure. Number 8 is going to be Miranda in the movie Life. This is Rebecca Ferguson's character, and she might not have to suffer as long as the girls in Wolf Creek, but I'm not sure she gets off much easier. Having her pod knocked off course and now in an uncontrolled spiral out into deep space, she now has to deal with the fact that not only did they fail, the human race is absolutely fucked. Calvin is going to do Calvin things all across the globe, and she'll have plenty of time to think about that as she's experiencing possibly the roughest finale anybody could possibly imagine. I mean, just think about it. Think about being trapped in that tiny space with no resources and absolutely no help possible. There's nobody coming for you. And you have just the nothingness of space outside the window as you wait to either die of suffocation, starvation, dehydration, if the cold doesn't freeze you eventually. So no thanks. This is pretty rough. Number 7 is going to be the few people who were unfortunate victims in Get Out. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the plot of Get Out, the short version is a crazy family lures African-American men back to their home, and women back to their home, and transfers their brains into the host bodies, and essentially they can live forever this way. And those unfortunate people who are taken over as the hosts, they don't die. They live completely conscious in like this sunken world, so that their nervous system still functions. They have a line about how they have to keep that part of the brain still functioning, so they're still alive, still conscious down there, but they have no control over their body, and it's stated that your existence is merely as a passenger. So, had the family not been stopped, this suffering could have been so much worse and went on for forever, but the few years that they were trapped like this would have been enough to drive a person absolutely mad. Again, not physically painful like some of the other entries on this list, but the powerlessness to even end your suffering has to make this one of the worst things on this list. Number 6 is going to be David Drayton in The Mist. Now, you knew this was coming. This ending is infamous, and everyone talks about it. Everyone knows it, and everyone loves to hate it. It's one of the most painful moments in all of cinema, and especially if you're a parent, you can imagine even a bit more what that experience must be like. So David Drayton murders his companions, one of them being his young son, to spare them from the pain of being killed by the creatures in the mist, only for the government to gain back control. We're talking seconds, minutes after the Mercy killing. So it's not even ironic, it's cruel as hell, but that's the point. This wasn't how the book ended, but Stephen King loved it. He loved this new ending because he knew that it was exactly what the story needed to evolve into something more, a fucking legend. If it had not been for the ending, I don't think this movie would have lived on like as fondly as it has. I think it would have been a fine movie, even a decent monster film, sure, but once David's fate was sealed, we all knew that, man, that dude would probably end up finding one more bullet anyway to feel better. And that's just, it's memorable. You'll never forget it. Number 5 is going to be Justin Long's character Walrus in Tusk. Now, this freaking guy, man, if you see Justin Long, just run. He's done. This dude is burnt toast. And in this movie, he may meet his worst fate ever. He's a podcaster who specializes in interviewing these weird people, and so he finds himself in front of Howard, a mysterious recluse who has a fondness for walruses. And he drugs Wallace and mutilates him several times, and Justin Long's Wallace ends up finding himself Walrus v. Walrus. If you've seen the movie, you understand what I'm saying. And he does get the opportunity for some vengeance in this moment, but after killing his captor, Howard, what does he win? He gets to spend the rest of his life living in a zoo, watching the woman that he loves live with someone else, while he's trapped living like a walrus, eating bad fish. It's as batshit crazy as it is tragic, and I might have let Johnny Depp just shoot me. Number 4 is going to be everyone getting slowly digested in Nope. Now, rarely has a movie left me so unsettled after watching it, but I just couldn't get over this scene. The people from the Star Lasso experience getting slowly sucked up into Jean Jacket. The sound of their screams haunted me as I thought about the implications of that, about that feeling. And then those fears were only heightened when you continue to hear the screams as Jean Jacket hovers over the Haywood Ranch, and then you hear the crunch, and it's silent. It all goes away, and the blood pours down. And I just couldn't help imagine how those last few hours, it was light time. It was middle of the day when they were sucked up. It's middle of the night when they finally end their lives. So I'm not even sure Jean Jacket ate any of these people. He just needed to use them for his own psychological game. Jordan Peele, damn, man, you scared me with this one, man. Number 3 is going to be Lindsay in The Human Centipede, the first sequence. Now, this one really doesn't need much explanation as to why it's less than ideal. Again, if somehow you're unfamiliar with this story, I'll give you a quick a synopsis. There's a crazy surgeon who kidnaps 2 ladies and a male to form a single creature using one digestive tract, and he connects the 3 unfortunate people ass to face, and Lindsay draws the short straw because she tries to escape and fails. So she ends up right in the middle. And I won't talk about why this is bad. You can use your imagination. Just watch the movie if you need to understand why this is a worse fate than death. But as it happens, her companions end up dead. The doctor ends up dead. The cops who were investigating and almost captured the guy were dead. Everyone's dead except for Lindsay, and she's just stuck in this awful situation with help, potentially on the way, possibly, probably on the way eventually. But could you imagine having to spend several days stuck in that situation? It's disgusting, and she probably could have just died anyway, even after suffering through all of that. So just no thanks. No thanks. At the number 2 spot, again, I'm going to get a little bit greedy and cheat a little bit, but it's hard to separate drag to hell scenes because they all imply the same terrible fate. So I just chose 3 of my favorites. More recently, you have the Exorcist Believer movie where the young girl is tragically pulled to hell at the very end because her father got greedy. He wanted to save his daughter, but in the end, he ended up sending her to hell. It's a terribly tragic scene. Then you jump back to 2009's aptly titled Drag Me to Hell. It ends with a girl sorta hilariously fumbling the button and getting drugged to hell. And it's kind of a weird, ridiculous, awesome scene. And if you want to go back to the amazing decade of the 90s, you have the cult classic Event Horizon and the crew that had to spend years in hell. You could also pull from pretty much any Pinhead movie, but it really doesn't matter how you get there. Ending up in hell sure seems like a fate much worse than death. Before we get into the number 1 spot, I want to do a couple honorable mentions. The wife in Gerald's Game. For the life of me, I can't remember her name, but I remember watching this movie. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you've seen it, holy crap, she goes through hell. The survivors at the end of It Follows. I know they've sort of conquered the beast, but you always have to have that underlying fear that it could be coming for you. And if you just wait long enough, it's probably going to come for you again, so you're never really off the hook. And at number 1, the worst movie fate other than death, and she, again, probably eventually died from all this, but the moment the movie stops, she's still alive some fucking how, is the girl from Terrifier 2, Allie, I believe is her name. It's a scene that I can't even really get through anymore. It's a lot. I don't know if it's too much. I'm not going to say it's too much, but it's a lot. And I do find myself having to stop throughout the scene. She gets her eye sliced open. She gets scalped. She gets skinned. She gets stabbed. Her arm broken and ripped off. Her hand freaking ripped in half. And then this mofo freaking leaves, and you think it might be over. You're like, wow, that was freaking intense. And then he comes back with bleach and salt and literally dumps the bleach all over this bitch and then rubs salt in her wounds. Jesus, it's so freaking metal. And somehow, when her mom comes home to find her, she's again inexplicably alive. Now, I'm sure she dies, but holy fuck, however long she made it had to be the worst kind of thing anybody could go through. This was next level in the most ridiculous way possible, and I'm sure, the director or writer would be, take that as the compliment that it is. Big fan. All right, so that's my list, everyone. Be sure to comment down below. Let me know any that I missed. I couldn't include them all, or this list would be 20, 30, 40 entries long if I wanted to include every single tragic ending that makes characters long for death. Again, some of these people eventually probably did die, but they suffered dearly beforehand. So make sure you let me know if I forgot any. Comment your favorite and comment any ideas you have for videos. I had a request for the Gremlins, so I will be covering the Gremlins movies very soon. That'll be a video look for that to come out soon. So again, comment any ideas you have. I'm happy to do them. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you guys so much for spending any kind of time being fans. Be good people, be good to each other, and we'll catch you next time.